Hello, hello YouTube. Today I would like to discuss this, some well-known new sound albums. New sound albums, meaning that a famous rock band would dramatically change their sound and style with a certain album. Okay, let's get this list started. First off is the first album I would like to discuss is Rush, Grace Under Pressure. In 1984, Rush released East, East Grace Under Pressure. Grace Under Pressure had a more pop and new wave inspired sounds, driven heavily with synthesizers. Grace Under Pressure was the second Rush album in their four album series from their synthesizer period, which started off with Signals 2 years prior. Signals, however, still contained the hard rock elements that the band had been doing during the 70s. Grace Under Pressure moved away from the band's hard rock roots towards and contains more shorter, more synthesizer based songs, with the guitar being nearly with a lack of guitar. While Rush would change their sounds very often during their whole entire career, Grace Under Pressure was a dramatic change in style. Oh, oh. While Signals still was still guitar heavy, and was still and still had a few hard rock songs, Grace Under Pressure was the move in their sound. And it moved away from their progressive rock roots. Second album is Deep Purple, Burn. Deep Purple released Burn in 1974. It was the band's first album with their mid-70s period era, which featured future Whitesnake lead vocalist David Coverdale and bassist and co-lead vocalist Glenn Hughes. Burn, with the two new members, Deep Purple moved away from their hard rock inspired sound and towards and Burn was more heavy on elements of blues and R&B and soul and funk. That the Coverdale Hughes era had been known for. The band's new style had really upset lead guitarist Ritchie Blackmore, and thus during their time in the band, he later quit the band and formed Rainbow. And Deep Purple would briefly continue with Tommy Bolin as their lead guitarist. But after Tommy Bolin had but after that the bands would break up in 1976, only to reunite it with their classic lineup nearly a decade later. The next album is Queen with The Game. In 1980, Queen released an album called The Game. The Game had a change in musical style. The band moved away from their operatic hard rock roots towards a more 80s pop sound, and the game had met major hit singles like Another One Bites the Dust and Crazy Little Thing Called Love, the latter of which was released a year before the game came out. Well, Next album is Guns N' Roses, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. Guns N' Roses released Use Your Illusion in late 1991. Use Your Illusion had a much more diverse sounds compared to Appetite for Destruction. Use Your Illusion contains elements of contains a lot of contains more elements of progressive rock, and it had the introduction of keyboards into the band, and it was played primarily by Axl Rose, a new keyboardist Dizzy Reed at the time, and before the release the release of the album also saw a change in lineups for the first time ever within the band, as Steven Adler had been fired for drug abuse, and the band featured Matt Sorum on drums. Use Your Illusion also had several bluesy songs, like the deep cuts like You Ain't the First, Bad Obsession, and even the Izzy Stradlin mainly the Izzy Stradlin pen tunes on the album. Dust and Bones, and 14 Years had, Next album is Green Day, The American Idiot. American Idiot by Green Day was released in 2004, and it saw a large change in style. Well, it had a more commercialized sound, and it was the band's first rock opera, first concept album in the vein of of the Who, Pink Floyd, and other classic rock bands. Contains more progressive rock elements, and American Idiot was like one of the best-selling albums of the 21st century. Featured the title track, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, Holiday, Wake Me Up When September Ends. Green Day had actually changed their sounds with every album they released during the 90s. Insomniac was much more darker and heavier than Dookie. Nimrod was, had a wide variety of different musical styles. Had more experimental directions with songs like Hitchin' a Ride. It also had some mellow jangle pop, like Redundant, Walking Alone, Worry Rock. It even had heavier songs that could have been on Insomniac. Platypus, I Hate You, a hate song loaded with swear words, and Take Back. It also had a surf rock instrumental, Last Ride In, which was full of instrumentation. Had percussion, violin, strings, horns, harmonica, and the song was kind of like the Green Day attempting to do Apache, an old surf rock instrumental. It also had King for a Day, a ska punk number with a horn section, and even had the song's well-known acoustic folk ballad, Good Riddance, Time of Your Life. And Warning Warning had even further developed the band's experimentation, as the Warning was heavily influenced by the 1960s British invasion era and classic folk rock. Next album is Aerosmith, Permanent Vacation. Aerosmith made a huge comeback in 1987 with Permanent Vacation. Permanent Vacation had a more radio-friendly pop sound. The band worked with outside songwriters for the first time ever, and was also Permanent Vacation had three of the band's biggest hits: Dude Looks Like a Lady, Ragdoll, and Angel. And next up is Van Halen, 5150. In 1986, Van Halen released 5150. So the bands move away from their had more keyboards and synthesizers played by Eddie Van Halen, and it had a new sound courtesy of new lead vocalist Sammy Hagar, who had replaced David Lee Roth after he acrimoniously left the band in early 1985. Next up is Linkin Park, 1,000 Suns. 2010s had a drastic change of style of genre for Linkin Park. Linkin Park moved away from their nu metal roots towards a more electronic industrial rock sound, and 1,000 Suns was the album was a success, and with their further their genres of changing, which culminated in with the release of One More Light in 2017. Chester Bennington had snapped regarding the bad reviews for the album due to that album's more pop-oriented direction and huge lack of rock and guitar. It culminated in the tragic events of Chester Bennington's suicide, just 2 months after the release of the album. And finally is Metallica, the Black Album. Metallica released the Black Album in 1991. With the Black Album, Metallica moved away from their thrash metal roots towards a more commercialized, mainstream heavy metal sound. Featured many well-known songs: Enter Sandman, Sad But True, Nothing Else Matters, The Unforgiven, Wherever I May Roam. Anyway, that wraps up this list. Hope you all like it. Please comment, rate, and subscribe. Thank you.